Radical innovation selection. We've seen that there's a challenge in selecting ideas for innovation. We can't simply do everything. But there are also many simple techniques when we're talking about do what we do better, incremental innovation. These can help us build a portfolio. The challenge starts to come when we talk about really radical innovation. First of all, organizations have a variety of what could be called killer phrases. Killer phrases are very simple. They always have the same structure. That's a great idea, but. That's a great idea, but we've never done anything like that before. That's a great idea, but we did try something like that before, and it didn't work. That's a great idea, but we can't afford it, we haven't the time, and so on and so forth. So there are plenty of defense mechanisms built into the organization. And in fact, we can talk about the idea of an organizational immune system. Just like in the human body, the immune system is designed to protect it from unnecessary and unwanted external threats, so organizations have an immune system. And when something uncertain and potentially challenging and dangerous comes in sight, the organization is remarkably good at pushing that away. And that inevitably gives rise to something which in innovation is often called the not invented here effect, where an organization, for apparently rational grounds, will actually reject an innovation which could be really important. Think about Kodak. Kodak was offered the Polaroid process by Edwin Land, but decided to turn it down. Kodak also turned down Chester Carlson's idea of instant photo reproduction, the Xerox process. Both of these decisions weren't taken lightly, but essentially the Kodak view, the organizational immune system, came up with a number of reasons why, although an interesting idea, it wasn't for Kodak. Now they're not isolated. The innovation history books are full of examples of the not invented here effect, and they're really to do with organizations struggling with the challenge of radical and really radical innovation, something at the edge of the radar screen that's unfamiliar and so hard to evaluate. This is really the challenge of how we work with high levels of uncertainty. We don't have knowledge, the market may not exist, the technology may be in its infancy. It's very hard to work out whether or not to do something. And in many situations, the challenge is one of co-evolution rather than trying to predict what is going to happen. In other words, inside the system, things change as a result of what we do and vice versa. Think right now of the car industry. It's been around over 100 years, but now it's in a radically different way. It's basically facing challenges on the technological frontier. It's facing challenges in terms of regulation and concerns about pollution. It's facing opportunities in terms of driverless cars. It's facing social changes in terms of whether or not we even own cars or what the nature of mobility should be. In fact, it's a soup of possibilities. And each change affects the other, so that if you were trying to predict whether or not to invest in this, you'd probably say no because of the uncertainty. The solution is to be in there, be part of the soup, at least with a small bet, to see what happens and go with that. So if we're looking for frameworks for selection, we can perhaps use a picture like this, essentially characterizing innovation in terms of incremental to radical, and characterizing the environment, the uncertainty, in terms of the old, the established frame, things that we do know about, the markets we watch, the competitors we keep an eye on, the technologies we're familiar with, and on the right-hand side, the new things that might be brought into our frame. And if we think about choosing frameworks and tools for selection in this way, it helps us see what we might be able to do. In terms of the incremental options, as we've already seen, this is essentially business as usual. Innovation's happening, but under what we might call steady state conditions, with a little disturbance around the core business model. And so we can use a variety of tools to help us take decisions in this space, building an innovation portfolio of incremental improvements. And the sorts of tools there, as we've seen, simple comparisons, simple checklists, tools to check that what we're doing, perhaps lots of small suggestions as a result of an employee involvement program, but to check that these are aligned with what the organization's trying to do. Matrix approaches, visual comparisons, and particularly bubble charts. All of them valuable tools to help us just make sure we're building a portfolio of useful and valuable incremental innovations. When we look at more radical options, the value at least is that the business model may not need to change. We're still working with markets we're familiar with, we're still working with technologies we understand, we're still keeping an eye on competitors we know about. Of course, we're exploring, there are more risks, but we know how to take those risks, and we can take strategic investments in R&D and other things to help us be certain and build our portfolio that way. The sorts of tools that are valuable here, as we've already seen, using a business case or a business model and providing detailed information and rich narratives that can help us make these decisions. And significantly here, the team itself making the pitch for something new becomes a part of the equation. Do we not only back the ideas, but do we back the people who are making the pitch to take us into this new and rather uncertain place? The challenge really comes, as it did with search, when we start looking beyond the lamppost, right at our periphery, in the longer distance future, further away from what we're familiar with. In this space, we need to have a different approach. And selection is much more difficult here because we're bringing in new elements in the environment we don't fully understand. We may need to reframe the way we look at them. We may need to work in this co-evolution fashion with other stakeholders. And the recipe here is almost simply be in there, be in the co-evolving soup, be in there early enough to see the way things are developed, and be in there actively to work with changes as they seem to emerge. So the sorts of tools we need in this space, certainly they're going to be business cases, business models, information-rich narratives, but they're going to be changing over time as information comes in unexpected fashion. They're very much influenced by the pitch and the team making that pitch, very much an entrepreneur's view of how the ideas might develop further. Many organizations use the idea of business case light. Since there isn't much information, we really don't understand the market, perhaps because the market itself is still emerging, so we can't be making detailed estimates of the size of it and the share we might take. Instead, we have to assemble a lightweight business case that gives us a sense that maybe it's worth carrying further in this direction. The strategy here is very much around probe and learn, investing short-term, small amounts of money in experiments and pilots to try and build a picture of whether or not this is a worthwhile direction to follow. And it's here that innovation labs, as experimental spaces, places to work with ideas, with technologies, and indeed with stakeholders, innovation labs become an important approach. And a number of other new venture tools, very much the kind of thing associated with entrepreneurs, things like staged funding rounds, where instead of backing a project all the way through, there is a review at various stages before further money is committed. So a very different toolkit, much more aligned with doing something under conditions of uncertainty. So let's try and summarize where we've been in this short film. As we've seen, for all but the startup situation, organizations are concerned with evaluating and selecting multiple competing projects. They need to get a balance between risks, the exploit-explore balance, looking at different time and space horizons, and so on. And they need ways of reviewing that portfolio and seeing how that is actually working out. Visual approaches like matrices and bubble charts are very helpful. But the challenge of really radical projects is that they actually make an attack on our immune system. And so it's important for organizations to find different ways to ensure they're at least given a fair chance at the front end to be seen as valuable innovation opportunities and not threats to the organization. So overall, organizations need to build capability to select across many different types of